"Excuse me, Miss Becker, but I have to ask, is this some kind of joke to you? Because in my courtroom we take perjury very seriously." Judge Harrison Vance lowered his reading glasses, letting them slide down the bridge of his nose as he peered over the bench. He held up the document in his hand, shaking it slightly for emphasis. It was a printed service record, attached to a sworn affidavit regarding a speeding violation defense based on an emergency response clause. But the judge wasn't looking at the speeding ticket anymore. He was looking at the attached biography and the photograph of a shadow box that had been submitted as character evidence. Standing at the defendant's table, Carly Becker didn't flinch. She stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped loosely in front of her. She was wearing a royal blue blouse that brought out the brightness of her eyes, her long blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. To the casual observer, she looked like a kindergarten teacher, or perhaps a marketing associate for a tech firm. There was a softness to her features that invited people to underestimate her, a trap that Judge Vance had just walked into with both feet. "It is not a joke, Your Honor," Carly said. Her voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room without a tremble. The microphone on the stand picked up the steady rhythm of her breathing. The judge let out a short, dry laugh that sounded more like a bark. He tossed the document onto the heavy oak desk in front of him, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at the gallery, then back at her, performing for an audience he assumed was on his side. "I have been sitting on this bench for 20 years, Miss Becker. I have seen veterans come through here. I have seen men who have stormed beaches and patrolled deserts. I know what a combat veteran looks like, and I know what a Silver Star recipient looks like." He paused, letting the silence stretch, waiting for her to squirm. She didn't. She just watched him, her face an unreadable mask of calm. "And frankly, young lady, you don't fit the bill," Vance continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You come in here wearing that bright blue top, looking like you just came from a brunch with your sorority sisters, and you expect me to believe that you were a chaotic environment operator. You expect me to believe you pulled 3 men out of a burning fuselage while under direct enemy fire." Carly shifted her weight slightly, the only sign of movement. The fabric of her royal blue blouse rustled softly. "Those are the facts, Your Honor. The record is verified." "Verified by who?" Vance shot back. "A printer at a copy shop. Anyone can forge a DD-214 these days. Anyone can buy medals online. It is actually a federal crime, Miss Becker. It is called stolen valor. And frankly, it insults the memory of the actual men who earned those awards when someone like you tries to use them to get out of a traffic citation." A murmur went through the courtroom. People in the wooden pews whispered behind their hands. To them, the optic was clear. A grumpy but righteous judge dressing down a young woman who had clearly overstepped. She looked too young, too delicate, too pretty. The cognitive dissonance was too great for them to bridge. In their minds, war heroes were gritty, scarred men with graying buzz cuts, not young women in fashionable royal blue tops. "I am not trying to use them to get out of anything," Carly said, her tone dropping an octave, becoming harder. "I submitted my record to explain why my reaction time and speed were necessary during the medical emergency I was responding to. The driving technique was consistent with my training." "Training," the judge scoffed. He picked up the file again, flipping a page with exaggerated dismissal. "It says here you were a pilot, an Army aviator." "That is correct, and not just transport. Attack? You flew Apaches." "Yes, Your Honor." Vance looked her up and down, his expression souring. "My niece is about your age. She can barely parallel park a sedan. You expect me to believe the United States Army gave you a $30 million gunship?" The court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, waiting for the answer. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Miller who had been standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. He had been watching Carly closely since she walked in. Unlike the judge, Miller noticed things. He noticed that she didn't fidget. He noticed that her eyes constantly scanned the exits and the sightlines of the room, not out of fear but out of habit. And he noticed the way she stood, the parade rest that she was consciously suppressing into a civilian stance. "The Army doesn't give anyone anything, Your Honor," Carly said. "You earn it." Vance shook his head, his patience evaporating. He was tired of the charade. He felt he was doing a public service by exposing a fraud. "Listen, Miss Becker, I am going to do you a favor. I am going to give you one chance to recant this submission. Admit that this is your husband's record, or your father's, and you got confused. Admit that you padded the resume. We'll pay the fine for the speeding, and I won't have the bailiff arrest you for filing false documents." Carly remained perfectly still. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with the electricity of the standoff. She looked at the judge, really looked at him, dissecting the insecurity behind his arrogance. "I cannot recant the truth," she said. Vance's face reddened. He slammed his hand down on the bench. "Then you leave me no choice. I am halting these proceedings for a competency verification. Bailiff, take custody of these documents. I want the clerk to run a full verification check with the federal database. And Miss Becker, you're going to sit right there until we find out exactly who you are trying to fool." He turned his gaze to the rest of the room. "We are going to take a 15-minute recess while we sort out this nonsense." As the gavel banged down, the room erupted into low chatter. The judge swept out of the room toward his chambers, his black robe billowing. Carly didn't sit down immediately. She exhaled, a long, controlled breath through her nose, and adjusted the cuffs of her royal blue blouse. Bailiff Miller walked over to the table to collect the documents. He moved slowly, his eyes locked on the shadow box photo that was still lying face up. He reached for it, his thumb brushing against the image of a specific medal, a silver star with a gold oak leaf cluster. But it wasn't the medal that stopped him. It was the small, grainy photo inset in the corner of the document, a picture of a flight crew standing in front of a dusted-out helicopter. Miller squinted. He had served in the Gulf years ago in a logistics unit. He knew enough to know what he didn't know, but he also knew what real quiet professionals looked like. He looked at the date on the citation. It was from a valley fight that had made the news a few years back, a massive extraction under fire. He looked up at Carly. She met his gaze. There was no pleading in her eyes, only a steel resolve. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice low so the gallery wouldn't hear. "The unit on this citation, the 101st. Carly nodded once. "Dust off and attack. We were heavy support that day." Miller looked back at the photo. He saw a call sign listed in the narrative, Valkyrie 6. His blood went cold. He remembered hearing that call sign on the secure nets when he was working a comms relay as a contractor years later. Valkyrie 6 wasn't just a pilot, she was a legend in the aviation circles. The woman who flew a bird with no hydraulics back to base to save the crew. "The judge, he's got a blind spot," Miller whispered, almost apologetically. "He has more than a blind spot," Carly replied quietly. "He has a vision of the world that doesn't include me." Miller nodded. He took the file, but instead of taking it to the back office for a slow verification, he walked briskly to the side desk where the court clerk, a young woman named Sarah, was organizing files. Miller leaned in, whispering urgently, "Don't just run the database, Sarah. You need to call the liaison office at Fort Hamilton. Now, tell them we have Valkyrie 6 in Judge Vance's court, and he's threatening to arrest her for stolen valor." Sarah's eyes went wide. "The pilot? The one from the documentary?" "Make the call," Miller said. Miller turned back to the courtroom. Carly Becker stood alone at the defense table, a sea of whispers behind her. She looked small against the dark wood of the legal furniture, her blue top a splash of color in a gray world. But Miller knew better now. He wasn't looking at a girl in a blouse. He was looking at a predator who was politely waiting for the permission to bite. The scent of hydraulic fluid and burning ozone hit her memory before the sound did. It was a sensory echo, triggered by the judge's mocking tone. Carly didn't close her eyes. She couldn't afford to lose situational awareness in the courtroom, but her mind superimposed the cockpit over the courtroom, the cyclic stick vibrating in her right hand, the master caution light screaming yellow and red, the voice in her ear, panic rising, "Taking fire, 3 o'clock low, RPG," the sensation of the aircraft lurching, the world spinning, not the polished wood of a courtroom but the jagged peaks of a mountain range. She remembered the weight of the helmet, the sweat stinging her eyes. She remembered the decision, the split-second choice to dive rather than climb, to put the belly of her aircraft between the incoming rounds and the medevac bird below her. She could feel the impact, the shudder that went through the airframe like a broken bone, the smell of copper and fear. She had held the hover. She had held it steady while the tracers reached up like fiery fingers trying to drag them down. She hadn't thought about her gender. She hadn't thought about her hair color. She had thought about vectors, wind speed, and the 4 souls in the back of the other helicopter. The distinguished flying cross wasn't a piece of metal to her. It was the memory of the crew chief giving her a thumbs up through a window smeared with oil. It was the feeling of landing on skids that were barely attached. The memory faded as the door to the judge's chambers opened, but the feeling remained, the cold, sharp clarity of combat. She looked at the empty bench. Judge Vance thought he was stripping her of her dignity. He didn't realize he was just polishing her armor. 10 miles away at the Fort Hamilton headquarters, the phone on the desk of Captain Davila rang. He picked it up expecting a logistics update. "Duty officer, Captain Davila." He listened for 10 seconds. His posture changed from relaxed to rigid. He grabbed a pen, scribbling furiously on a notepad. "Say again, Judge Vance? And he's accusing her of what?" He listened for another 5 seconds, his jaw tightening. "You are sure it's Becker? Carly Becker?" Davila didn't wait for the answer. He dropped the phone, leaving the line open, and bolted out of his office. He sprinted down the hallway, past the portraits of past commanders, past the polished floors, skidding to a halt in front of a heavy double door guarded by an MP. "I need to see the general. Now." The MP started to protest. "Sir, the general is in a strategy briefing with, it's about Valkyrie. She's being detained by a civilian judge who thinks she's a fraud." The MP's face hardened. He opened the door immediately. Inside the conference room, General Alicia Thorne was pointing at a digital map of the Pacific Theater. She was a commanding presence, a black woman of imposing stature, her Army Green Service uniform tailored perfectly. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. The pinks and greens uniform, a callback to the Wetui era, looked timeless on her. She didn't just wear the rank, she embodied the institution. Captain Davila burst in, breathless. "General, ma'am, apologies for the interruption. We have a code blue situation at the county courthouse." General Thorne turned slowly, her expression stern. "This had better be good, Captain. It's Major Becker, ma'am, the retired major. She's in traffic court. The judge is holding her in contempt. He's accusing her of stolen valor. He's laughing at her record." The room went silent. Several colonels and a brigadier general looked at Thorne. They knew the history. They knew that Carly Becker had been Thorne's wingman during the surge. They knew that Thorne was alive today because Becker had put her bird in the line of fire. General Thorne's eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "He's doing what?" "He thinks she's lying, ma'am. He's mocking the Silver Star citation." Thorne didn't say another word. She reached for her cover, the crushed service cap with the gold braid, and placed it on her head. She looked at her staff. "Briefing is adjourned. Get the detail. We are going to court." Back in the courtroom, the 15-minute recess had stretched to 20. Judge Vance returned to the bench, looking refreshed and even more smug than before. He adjusted his robes and looked down at Carly, who was still standing at the table. "Well, Miss Becker, my clerk tells me the database is taking a while to load. Government efficiency, I suppose. But I've been reviewing the physical evidence you submitted." He held up the photograph of the medals again. "I noticed something. You have a combat action badge listed here, and yet, in your statement, you claim to be a pilot. Pilots get air medals. The CAB is for soldiers who actively engage the enemy in ground combat. It seems you mixed up your lies. You couldn't even get the regulations right." He smiled, a predatory grin. "That is a technical error that betrays the whole fraud. You see, when you construct a lie, you have to be consistent." Carly took a breath to speak, to explain the policy change regarding aviation and combat action, and the specific ground engagement she had been part of after a downed aircraft event. But Vance cut her off. "No, I've heard enough. I am holding you in contempt of court for falsifying evidence. I am also recommending that the district attorney file charges for stolen valor. Bailiff, please take Miss Becker into custody." The crowd gasped. This was it. The hammer was coming down. Bailiff Miller hesitated. He looked at the doors at the back of the room. He was stalling. "Bailiff," Vance barked. "Did you hear me? Cuff her." Miller took a step forward, his face pained. "Miss Becker, He was interrupted by a sound that was unfamiliar in a civilian courthouse. It was the heavy rhythmic thud of synchronized boots on marble, not the clacking of dress shoes but the solid ground-shaking impact of military precision. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. 2 military police officers in full-duty gear stepped in, scanning the room and moving to the flanks. The gallery turned, necks craning. Then she walked in. General Alicia Thorne moved with a kinetic energy that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Her AGSU uniform was impeccable, the dark olive coat contrasting with the lighter trousers. The 4 stars on her shoulders caught the fluorescent lights. Behind her trailed a phalanx of staff officers, a colonel, 2 majors, and a sergeant major, whose chest was a wall of ribbons. The murmurs in the gallery died instantly. The silence was total. Judge Vance froze, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the woman in the royal blue top to the woman in the 4-star uniform. General Thorne didn't look at the judge. She walked straight down the center aisle, her gaze fixed on Carly. She marched past the bar, past the stunned prosecutor, and stopped 3 feet from the defense table. Carly Becker instinctively snapped to attention, her heels coming together, her posture straightening into the rigid line of a soldier. General Thorne halted. She raised her right hand in a slow, crisp salute. Carly returned it, her hand cutting through the air with a precision that no civilian could mimic. "Major," General Thorne said, her voice ringing like a bell in the quiet room. "General," Carly replied. Thorne held the salute for a second longer than regulation, a sign of deep personal respect before dropping her hand. Only then did she turn to face the bench. Judge Vance was gripping his gavel like a lifeline. "I am General Alicia Thorne, Commander of United States Army Forces Command," the general said, "and I am here to correct a clerical error." "A clerical error?" Vance stammered, trying to regain his authority. "We are in the middle of a proceeding regarding this woman's fraudulent claims." Thorne stepped up to the bench. She moved with the terrifying confidence of someone who commanded corps-sized elements. "There is nothing fraudulent about Major Carly Becker, Judge." Vance pointed a shaking finger at Carly. "She claims she has a silver star. She claims she flew Apaches. Look at her." She leaned forward, placing her hands on the prosecution table, leaning into the judge's sphere of influence. "You are looking at her hair, Judge. You are looking at her blouse. You are looking at her age. You are seeing what you want to see." Thorne turned to the gallery, addressing the room as if she were giving a briefing. In 2014, then Captain Becker was the lead pilot of an Apache section in the Korangal Valley. I was the ground commander of a task force that was pinned down by 300 enemy combatants. We were taking heavy casualties. We were out of ammo. We were calling for Broken Arrow. The general gestured to Carly. Captain Becker flew into a box canyon with zero visibility. She drew fire away from my men. When her wingman was hit, she didn't retreat. She maneuvered her aircraft between the enemy and the downed bird. She stayed on station for 45 minutes with a shattered canopy and a failed hydraulic system. She is the reason 22 men and women came home to their families that day. She is the reason I am standing here today. Thorne turned back to Vance, her eyes blazing. "She doesn't look like a hero to you because your definition of a hero is narrow and outdated. You think Valor looks like a movie poster, but Valor looks like her. Valor looks like a woman in a blue shirt who served her country with more distinction in a single afternoon than most people do in a lifetime." Vance was pale. He looked at the document on his desk, the one he had laughed at. The dates matched, the names matched, the reality of his mistake was crashing down on him like a falling wall. "But, the combat action badge," Vance whispered, grasping at straws. Thorne didn't blink. "She was part of a downed aircraft recovery team in 2016. She engaged enemy combatants on the ground to defend a triage site. She is one of the few aviators in history to hold both the wings and the badge. If you had bothered to read the citations instead of mocking them, you would know that." The general signaled to her sergeant major, who stepped forward carrying a velvet case. He opened it to reveal the actual medals, shining heavy and undeniably real. "We brought these from the base museum archives," Thorne said, "where they were being prepped for a display on women in aviation. Major Becker doesn't wear them because she is humble, because she believes the service is the reward." Thorne looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and disdain. "You threatened to arrest her for stolen valor. But the only thing being stolen here today is this officer's dignity by a court that judges books by their covers." The courtroom erupted, not in whispers this time, but in applause. Someone in the back started clapping, and it spread like wildfire. The Bailiff Miller was grinning broadly. Even the court reporter was wiping a tear from her eye. Judge Vance sat back, shrinking into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He raised his gavel, but he didn't bang it. He just set it down gently. "Miss Becker." "Major Becker," Vance said, his voice raspy. Carly looked at him. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just waited. It appears I have made a significant error in judgment." General Thorne crossed her arms. "An apology, Judge. For the record." Vance swallowed hard. "I apologize, Major Becker. I allowed my assumptions to cloud my judicial prudence. The court accepts your service record as valid. The traffic citation is dismissed under the emergency response provision. You are free to go." "Thank you, Your Honor," Carly said. Her voice was just as calm as it had been at the start. She turned to General Thorne. The two women looked at each other. There was a silent communication between them, a shared understanding of the burdens they carried, the constant need to prove themselves, and the bond of the brotherhood and sisterhood that transcended uniforms. "Dinner?" Thorne asked quietly. "I'm buying," Carly smiled. Outside the courthouse, the air was fresh. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the stone steps. The general's motorcade was waiting, lights flashing, a spectacle that had stopped traffic on the main street. Carly stood by the lead SUV with the general. "You didn't have to come," Carly said. "I had him on the ropes." "I know," Thorne replied, adjusting her cap, But sometimes you need close air support. Carly laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension of the afternoon. She looked down at her royal blue top. I guess I should have worn the uniform. Thorne shook her head. She reached out and touched Carly's shoulder. No, it's better that you didn't. They need to learn, Carly. They need to learn that we are everywhere. We are the teachers, the doctors, the mothers, and the women in the bright blue tops. We don't wear the armor on the outside anymore. We keep it on the inside. Thorne climbed into the SUV. The door closed with a heavy thud. As the convoy pulled away, Carly watched them go. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small battered challenge coin that she had carried with her every day since the Korangal Valley. She rubbed her thumb over the raised wings. She turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the crowd of civilians. She looked just like everyone else, unassuming, quiet, but as she walked she held her head a little higher, knowing that while the world might see just a woman in a blue blouse, she knew exactly who she was, and now so did they. If you enjoyed this story of courage and vindication, please like, share, and subscribe to She Chose Valor. Help us share more stories of the incredible women who have served, sacrificed, and continue to lead.